I'm a conservative Republican, and I believe deeply in the policies of limited government, of low taxes, of a strong national defense. I believe that the family is the center of our community and of our lives, and I believe those are the right policies for our nation. But I also know that at this moment, we are confronting a domestic threat that we have never faced before, and that is a former president who is attempting to unravel the foundations of our constitutional republic. And he is aided by Republican leaders and elected officials who've made themselves willing hostages to this dangerous and irrational man. As the full picture is coming into view with the January 6th committee, it has become clear that the efforts Donald Trump oversaw and engaged in were even more chilling and more threatening than we could have imagined. As we have shown, Donald Trump attempted to overturn the presidential election. He attempted to stay in office and to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power. He summoned a mob to Washington. He knew they were armed on January 6th. He knew they were angry. And he directed the violent mob to march on the Capitol in order to delay or prevent completely the counting of electoral votes. He attempted to go there with them. And when the violence was underway, he refused to take action to tell the rioters to leave. Instead, he incited further violence by tweeting that the Vice President, Mike Pence, was a coward. He said, quote, "Mike deserves it." And he didn't want to do anything in response to the Hang Mike Pence chants. It's undeniable. It's also painful for Republicans to accept. And I think we all have to recognize and understand what it means to say those words and what it means that those things happened. But the reality that we face today as Republicans, as we think about the choice in front of us, we have to choose, because Republicans cannot both be loyal to Donald Trump and loyal to the Constitution. At this moment,
I think it's quite humorous to see how many liberals are so excited about Liz Cheney, and I would have to say they're basically idolizing her, because the reality is Liz Cheney in some ways is sane, intelligent Trump. From a policy standpoint, she is sane, intelligent Trump. She voted with Trump, I think, 95% of the time. She's ranked as highly conservative in the Republican Party. She ranks very high. She's much more conservative than the one that the Republican Party replaced her with, the person who was attacking Trump and was an anti-never-Trumper, but saw the way the power was moving and the money. So just like Trump, who was a Democrat and flipped to Republican to scam the Republican base, she switched from being a never-Trumper to being pro-Trump, and she was rewarded with a high position in the Republican Party, taking down Liz Cheney. But the reality is, again, she's super conservative. She was voting with Trump a majority of the time. So if a liberal doesn't like Trump, then you shouldn't like Liz Cheney. You can respect her for what she's doing in this moment, but she was part of the very corruption that she's calling out, right? She was in this corrupt Republican Party. She was working with Trump to do a lot of the stuff that these liberals claim to have a big issue with. Again, in this moment, you can respect what she's doing, but when you start idolizing her, that doesn't make any sense. But what's equally absurd is the conservative response. If I were a conservative, I would be a big supporter of Liz Cheney right now. Now, because I'm anti-establishment, I'm against the status quo. I see what status quo has been bringing us with stagnant wages and inequality and issues with healthcare and education and just all this debt-based economy. So I would still want a lot of change, which I guess is contradictory to being a conservative. One of the key things about conservatism is supposed to be protecting traditions, right? A conservative wouldn't really want change. A conservative would look at a lot of stuff that's happening today and would be against it. And they would look back in the past and, back in the day, families were more important and people were more respectful or whatever ideas they have of the past. But if I were a conservative, I would highly support Liz Cheney, but I would actually do what the left claimed they were going to do with Biden. Let's elect Biden to get Trump out of office, and then we'll push him left. But then Biden got elected, and there was no pushing. They just went to sleep, went in a coma, decided to beef among themselves, and otherwise just disengage. Right? There was really no pressure on Biden to go left. Right? The most supposedly radical people in the Democratic Party weren't really fighting him, and the base wasn't really fighting him. Right? The biggest fight was coming from the right. That rhymes. I would actually want to push Liz Cheney in a different direction. I would respect that, like myself, she's a conservative. I would respect that in this moment, she seems to be the one that's most true to conservatism, because I could see that other Republicans are becoming very radical, and there's this culture of demagoguery and just pandering and propaganda and fear mongering and radical socialists going to take over all that kind of stuff. I would see that and I would reject that, and I would be more accepting of someone like a Liz Cheney, but I would want to put a lot of political pressure on her to be a better version of herself. Probably have issues with her views on wars and other pro-establishment types of things. But I would be embarrassed by the rest of the Republican Party, and in this moment proud of Liz Cheney as a conservative who believes in conservatism, as she mentioned. But the thing about it is, what I've found from Republican voters is the more corrupt you are, typically the more support you're going to get. You're saying crazy stuff and you're out there getting people all like fear mongering and they coming this and that, like that gets you a lot of attention. A lot of the Republican voters seem to be very, very focused on just going against the left or the Democrats or the liberals, right? So if you're super, super anti-liberal and vocally so, angry tweets on Twitter and saying a bunch of stuff, Pelosi, this, that, that is what gets you a lot of respect from the Republican voters. The more sort of sane that you are, the more principled you are, it seems like the less support that you get. There's actually an opposite response. The way that I would expect a conservative to respond to radicals like Green and Gates, they react that way to somebody like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. But it makes no sense to me. I'm not a conservative, so I appreciate that maybe I'm missing some of the views of conservatives. But what I would ask to a conservative is, she made claims that she is a conservative, and she talked about her definition of conservatism. She talked about the importance of the family, limited government, and low taxes. So number one, is her representation of conservatism as stated, right? Let's put aside how genuine she might or might not be. As stated, you a conservative listening to this right now, is that description more or less accurate? And if so, do you believe that Liz Cheney does not or has not been living up to those principles? So as a politician, has she not focused on the family, focused on low taxes, and focused on limited government? Has she in actuality pushed for government expansions and more social programs and bigger safety net, which is in contrast to what she just said? Has she been pushing for policies that are antagonistic to family values? Like, how has she actually governed? Has she governed in a way that's antagonistic to family values? Has she been pushing for tax increases, or has she been asleep at the wheel in trying to limit taxes? Or has she been true to her description of conservatism. Family focused, low taxes, strong national defense. If her description of conservatism is accurate, and if you're unable to present to me how she's betrayed these values in how she has governed, then why is it that, in my view, I get the impression that most conservatives don't like her? However, they don't seem to be too concerned about people like Matt Gaetz, who might have been involved in child sex trafficking. And even if he wasn't involved in child sex trafficking, I mean, the man is just trash, right? He's a troll. He's disingenuous. He's all about political theater. I mean, just straight up scumbag. Why are Republicans more concerned about this woman who has someone who's admittedly not a conservative? So maybe I'm missing something, and please correct me in the comment section. Why is there more outrage about her than there is about a guy who might have been involved with child sex trafficking? Why is there more outrage about her than a lunatic like Boebert, who says that the church should control government? She states that the church should control government. That would essentially equate to the American version of Sharia law, right? That's the direction that she's pushing our country. Religious rule. So we, as private citizens of different beliefs or lack thereof, would be subject to laws based on the religious beliefs of the elites among us. Boebert wants the church to control government. Again, that is what they do in the Middle East with things like Sharia law. I would think a conservative would be outraged by that because our country's never been that way, right? She's talking about something that is radical, changing, spitting in the eye of tradition, of American values, right? We've always had this tradition of separation between church and state, freedom of religion. These are core American values. Boebert seems to get less outrage from American conservatives than somebody like Liz Cheney, who admittedly, as someone who's not a conservative, so there's going to be some ignorance on my part, I look at Liz Cheney as being the true conservative. She's not talking about, the things she's talking about match our history from the conservative perspective. Family values, low taxes, strong national defense. This has a history in this country. That's what she claims to stand for. I've seen no evidence that she doesn't really stand for those things. The idea that the church controls government, that doesn't have history. So that's not a conservative perspective. So why is Boebert not the one getting the reaction that Liz Cheney is getting? Why are people who are less conservative getting more support by American conservatives than somebody who's more conservative? They literally replaced a more conservative person at a high level in the Republican Party with someone who's less conservative, ranked as less conservative, with little to no pushback from the Republican base. American conservatives didn't say, "What are you doing? We don't agree with everything Liz Cheney does, but you're going to replace her with a never-Trumper who is more distant from our conservative values?" Instead, what I see is it seems like conservatives ignore her conservatism and try to find something, the most negative thing you can attach to her, right? Obviously, all politicians, there's something that they do that you don't agree with, right? So there's things that Liz Cheney has done I'm sure you don't agree with. So they choose to focus on those things. Ignore her conservatism, ignore her principled conduct that she's demonstrating now, and focus on maybe she was a warmonger or something. But that same perspective is not utilized for someone who might have been involved in child sex trafficking, for a woman who's essentially pushing for an American Sharia law when she's saying church controls government. Instead, there's an opposite approach. You like Trump. Matt Gaetz is pro-Trump. You hate liberals. Matt Gaetz goes after liberals. So you tolerate or accept him based on those things which you put as a higher priority than conservatism, right? So Liz Cheney being more conservative is less important than Matt Gaetz and Boebert and Green being very anti-liberal, anti-left, and going after Democrats. Like, that seems to be the highest priority. You could be the most family values, low taxes person that you want to be, but if you don't like Trump, and you're not focused on attacking the left and attacking the liberals and all this kind of theatrics and um, culture war stuff, you're not going to get a lot of support from American conservatives. And I don't understand that. As an outsider who is a political orphan, the way I see Liz Cheney is she's a conservative. I'm not for conservatism. I respect people who have that different view. I strongly disagree with it. But this is America. We're, land of the free. We're open to have our different views and different perspectives. And my view is aggressively opposed to Liz Cheney's views. So politically, we're on totally different pages. Beyond that, she was part of a party that I feel is very, very corrupt. Democrats are corrupt as well, but Republicans take it to an entirely different level. Democrats at least pretend not to be corrupt and seem to have some level of standard. It's very low standard, but they got some standard. Republicans, it's almost anything goes. The limits are going against Trump or going against the party. Other than that, you can go to white nationalist rallies. No big deal. You're not getting ousted, right? You can go on stage and say what did she say? White lives, the victory for white life, and then you say, oh well, I made a mistake. I didn't know. Multiple people go to white nationalist rallies and say, oh, well, I didn't know it was white nationalist, right? And that's totally fine. You can lie, get involved in various schemes, unless you're convicted. I guess if you get convicted, maybe they'll sort of distance themselves from you, but unless you're convicted, it's all good. Lie, steal, scheme, whatever, and it's all good in the Republican Party. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, politician has an affair. Next thing you know, they're out of the party. Remember that one? Right. In the Democratic Party, you are a progressive candidate who opposes the mainstream, opposes the establishment in any way. The Democratic Party spends millions of dollars to stop you from gaining more power or getting elected. They will primary you. In the Republican Party, the more radical you are, and therefore the more power you have over the base, the more support you get. The Republican Party is not spending millions of dollars trying to kick out Boebert and Green and Gates, right? These people are enabled, supported, welcomed. Meanwhile, progressive Democrats like Nina Turner get millions of dollars poured in to block her from getting anywhere because she might possibly, I don't have a lot of faith in this, but she might possibly, if she gets into power, push for policies that would help regular Americans, increasing our safety net, getting us more affordable health care. That's the kind of stuff that she might push for, and that's a problem for the Democrats. They spend millions of dollars to keep her out because of that. Think about that. That's what the Democrats, like, just going against the mainstream, that's a problem. In the Republican Party, you can be against the mainstream, and you can be radical and saying all kinds of crazy stuff, super divisive. The left this, the left that, the left this, Democrat that. All about division and fighting and culture wars. But if that's getting the base jazzed up, you get supported. You know who gets attacked? The ones who have the most principle. If you dare to think outside the box or to think outside of the monolith, the GOP monolith. Like, if the GOP has a stance on something, you're not allowed to have a different stance. Trump is super popular. He's pretty much running the show. You're not allowed to challenge Trump. If you challenge Trump, that's what gets you attacked. That's what gets you demonized. That's what gets you ostracized. Then I hear ridiculous things like one of my subscribers the other day was telling me something about Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger about how I was talking about multimillionaires on Fox News that will potentially pretend to be Trump supporters because they're making millions of dollars doing that. And they said that Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney might be the same thing because they're trying to get these contracts, lucrative contracts on like CNN and MSNBC. So this person was so bought into the mainstream conservative narrative coming from Fox News and right-wing media that they honestly believe that Liz Cheney potentially destroying a decades-long career, putting her life and her family's in danger, right? Same thing with Adam Kinzinger. He's getting death threats. They're threatening his children. He's losing family members. So this person is suggesting that putting your life and your family's life in danger, putting yourself in a spot, like all these like QAnon, there's all kinds of wackos out there, right? We saw some of them stabbing police with flagpoles on January 6th. Some of those type of people will obviously try to target Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And this person's suggesting that putting your life at risk, like where can Liz Cheney go now and not be looking over her shoulder? You think Matt Gaetz has to look over his shoulder? I mean, he might get trolled. Somebody might troll him, like he definitely gets trolled. But who's out to kill Matt Gaetz? There's any Republican voter who is sickened by even his close affiliation with a child sex trafficker, his friend that's in jail, and is like looking to take him out? Is there any like major conservative circles that are like, sending him death threats? Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are conservatives, and I'm sure they probably live in conservative areas, which means by going against the party, by going against Trump, they are ostracizing themselves. They're putting themselves as a big target, all for the potential of getting a TV contract. Most of these politicians are multimillionaires. They're making like $180,000 a year. They got millions in the bank. Do you really think the potential of making a little bit more money, perhaps, is worth alienating yourself from your community, your family, and having to look over your shoulder, perhaps for the rest of your life? That's the same thing as Tucker Carlson just sleeping his way into this lucrative job at Fox News, where he gets looked at as a hero for all the hate and nonsense that he puts on TV. That's the same thing. Tucker Carlson living a life of luxury and being looked at as a hero, direct access to the president and the elites. That's the same thing as Adam Kinzinger risking the life of his family, alienating himself from his own ideology, right? Many people who share his ideology look at him as the enemy. They look at him as a traitor. And that's the same thing as these ludicrous or lunatic opinion journalists on Fox News. Ingram, Hannity. That's what somebody suggested to me. Right. The impression that this all gives me is that you could be a Republican and do all the right things. You're not a warmonger. You're family first, America first, low taxes, limited government. You could be the conservatives' conservative, not have any of the baggage that Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger might have. But you go against Trump and you call out the party for their corruption, and you will get treated by the Republican base as if you're what Matt Gaetz actually is, what Green actually is, what Boebert actually is. You will get the treatment that they should be getting, but instead they get the opposite. What is really going on here? How can we make sense of this? Because I can't. It doesn't make sense, and I'm fearful of where this leads us. We're not heading in a good place. And I think a big part of the problem is partisan media, right wing, left wing. We need more news media and much, much less partisan media. Less tribalism, more unity. Less radicalism, more reality. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell, be well.